My name is Olivia Carter, and 5 years ago my own family tried to block me from getting on a plane to Paris for my graduation. That morning in our Phoenix kitchen, I held a white envelope with my ticket inside and checked my phone. 5 hours until I had to be at the airport. My mom walked in, saw the envelope, and her whole face went stone cold. Before I could say a word, she snatched it from my hand, crossed the room, flipped open the big green trash can by the garage door, and dropped the ticket in. My little sister Jenna stood beside her and laughed. "What does a beggar like you need a graduation trip to Paris for?" she said, loud and sharp, like she wanted it to sting. They both started laughing. It filled the whole house. For a second I froze. Then I didn't. I walked over, lifted the lid, and reached down into the sticky, sour-smelling trash without flinching. I pulled out the crumpled ticket, wiped it on my jeans, grabbed my suitcase and headed for the front door. "If you walk out that door, don't come crawling back," my mom shouted. I paused just long enough to tell her that whether I crawled back would be her decision, not mine. 5 hours later I was buckled into a seat, flying toward the city they swore I would never see. 5 years later my doorbell camera would show me two tired, desperate faces on my front steps in Brooklyn, hitting the button like it was a lifeline. And this time the beggars weren't me. If anyone has ever tried to throw your future in the trash, stay with me. Share this with someone who needs proof that walking away can be the beginning of everything. When the plane finally leveled out above the clouds, I leaned my head back and tried to breathe. But my mind kept dragging me back to Phoenix, back to how long things had been rotting before that ticket ever hit the trash. I grew up in a low one-story house on the edge of the city, in a neighborhood where every driveway was cracked the same way and every lawn had the same brittle, sunburned grass. My mom, Lisa, worked at a big box furniture store. She came home limping on sore feet, arms full of bills reminding us how much everything cost. She was always tired, always stressed, always one envelope away from snapping. My little sister Jenna was usually on her phone, filming outfit videos or practicing poses in the living room like an invisible audience was already waiting for her. She built her whole world around ring lights and filters. I was the one patching the gaps. I opened the cafe at 5 in the morning, rode the first bus, came home smelling like espresso and sugar syrup, and then cooked, cleaned, and squeezed in online art classes with whatever energy was left. Every month I laid folded cash on the kitchen counter for rent. My mom would scoop it up without really looking at me and mutter that it barely made a dent. Jenna would roll her eyes and say I should paint faster if I wanted to be actually useful. On paper, we were just a normal working family. In reality, there was one unspoken rule. My value was measured only in what I could provide for them, not in who I was trying to become. I didn't talk much about Paris at the beginning. The idea felt fragile, like if I said it out loud it would burst. Late at night, after they went to bed, I sat on the floor of my tiny room, surrounded by canvases leaning against the walls. I kept painting the same feeling. A figure climbing out of a box while hands reached in to drag them back. I took photos of those pieces and sent them to an international art program based in Paris. I hit send, half convinced the email would vanish into the void. The acceptance letter came in a cheap white envelope with a small logo in the corner, and my name spelled right for the first time in ages. They offered me a partial scholarship and a slot in their graduation showcase. I stared at the words until they blurred. A stranger, someone who didn't share my last name, was telling me I was worth investing in. When I showed my mom the letter, she didn't smile. She held it like it was a scam. "Paris," she said slowly, like the word itself offended her. "And who's going to pay the bills while you play artist in France?" I told her I'd keep working until I left, that the program covered most of my tuition, that I had savings, that this was my chance. She shook her head and waved the letter toward Jenna like I just announced I was running away to join the circus. "My little influencer," she said to my sister. "At least you're doing something real. Something with a future." Then she turned back to me. "Art doesn't pay the mortgage, Olivia. Coffee tips don't keep the lights on. You're dreaming." It hurt because she knew exactly how many hours I stood on my feet to bring those tips home. It hurt more when Jenna chimed in, smirking. "You're always asking for more time, more understanding, more everything," she said. "Begging for chances. And for what? Some sad painting in a city you can't even afford." She called me a beggar like it was a joke. Like that word belonged to me. That night, I washed their dishes while they laughed at a show in the living room, and something I'd been avoiding finally settled in. In that house, I would never be more than unpaid help with an embarrassing dream. They didn't see my acceptance letter as an achievement. They saw it as a threat. If I left, they'd lose the person who took the early shifts, scrubbed the pans, and quietly paid the late fees. If I stayed, I'd lose the only shot I had at being anything more than the family beggar. That was the tension humming beneath the surface the morning my mom spotted the plane ticket on the counter. That was everything behind her eyes when she walked it to the trash. And it was everything behind mine when I reached in after it and finally chose not to stay small so they could stay comfortable. Leaving home rarely feels cinematic in the moment. There's no soundtrack when you drag your suitcase over cracked concrete. No slow motion as the Uber pulls up. Just the sound of your own heartbeat and one question pounding in your skull. Am I making the biggest mistake of my life? As the car pulled away from the Phoenix house, I watched the front door in the side mirror, half expecting it to burst open, my mom running out to say she didn't mean it. The door stayed shut. The only thing that followed me was the echo of her voice. Don't come crawling back. On the way to the airport, my phone buzzed. It was Taylor, my best friend from high school, the only person who'd said Paris made sense, that my talent was real even when I couldn't see it. She'd sent a screenshot of a bank transfer, money carved out of her nurse's paycheck. Her message was short. I can't fix your family, Liv, but I can help you get on that plane. Please don't waste this chance. I stared at her words until my eyes burned and texted back a simple thank you. Anything longer and I would have sobbed loud enough for the driver to hear. By the time I landed in Paris, the sun was sinking behind thick gray clouds. Whatever dreamy movie version of the city I'd carried in my head evaporated, as a slice of cold air hit me outside the airport. The program had arranged a tiny dorm room on the edge of the city. A narrow bed, a small desk, and a window overlooking a street that never really went quiet. I hauled my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs and unlocked the door. For the first time in my life, no one walked in behind me. No one yelled about dishes or demanded rent. The silence was relief and weight at the same time. The next morning, reality hit. Food cost more than I'd expected. My scholarship covered tuition and part of housing, but all the small daily expenses added up fast. I walked for hours dropping off resumes at cafes and shops, stumbling through basic French, trying to look like I belonged. After a week, a little coffee shop near the art school hired me for early shifts. A few days later, one of my professors mentioned that a nearby gallery needed part-time help preparing for a show. That's how I met Elise Rousseau. The first time I stepped into her gallery, I almost forgot to breathe. White walls, concrete floor, canvases spaced so each could speak on its own. Elise was sharp and self-contained, gray hair pulled back, gaze so direct it made you stand up straighter. She barely glanced at my resume before nodding. We need someone who can carry ladders and not drop things, she said. Can you do that? I could. For weeks I swept floors, unpacked crates, and held paintings while she decided if they needed to be a half-inch higher or lower. My arms shook, but I didn't complain. I was just another broke student trying to survive the city. One night after closing, I was wiping a table when she noticed my sketchbook sticking out of my bag. Show me, she said, casual but testing. I hesitated, then handed it over. She flipped through page after page of messy mixed media pieces. Ticket stubs, coffee receipts, paint scraped across pencil lines. The same image appeared again and again. A figure clawing its way out of a pile of trash, gripping a paper ticket that looked a lot like the one from my mother's garbage can. You're very literal, she said, snapping the book shut. But you're honest. It was the closest thing to praise I'd heard in years. She told me to email her 3 finished pieces. If she liked them, she might hang one in a small corner of the gallery. No promises. I stayed up 3 nights in that cramped dorm room, floor covered in paint-splattered newspaper. When I finally carried the canvases to the gallery, paint still stained my hands. A week later, I walked in and saw one of them hanging in the far left corner with a small printed label underneath. Olivia Carter. Mixed media. I just stood there frozen while guests walked by with cheap white wine. Most didn't stop. Few did. One older woman, clearly American, stayed longer than the others, tilting her head, eyes tracing the layers. She asked Elise who the artist was. Elise nodded toward me. The woman smiled and said she wanted to buy it. The amount she paid wasn't huge. But when Elise put the envelope in my hand at the end of the night, It felt like the universe was whispering that coming here hadn't been insane. That envelope covered groceries and bus rides in a few days when I didn't have to count skipped meals as a budgeting strategy. More than that, it bought back a small piece of my self-respect. I wasn't just the girl who slid tips across a kitchen counter and got called a beggar. I was the artist whose work someone chose to take home. I had no idea that tiny sale was the first link in a chain that would lead straight back to that same word. And the people who used it to break me. Success in Paris didn't arrive with fireworks. It came as early alarms, aching feet, and nights bent over canvases under harsh dorm room light. After that first sale, nothing magically changed. I still opened the coffee shop at dawn and wiped tables for strangers who had no idea my work hung in a gallery around the corner. Between classes and shifts, I kept painting. I filled sketchbooks with the same recurring image of escape, layering scraps and paint until my hands cramped. Elise watched. She didn't hand out compliments, but she started asking more questions. "What are you trying to say?" she'd ask, tapping a corner of a canvas. "Why bury the ticket under so much paint?" She pushed me to turn my pain into a story other people could enter, not just my own therapy. When the program announced our final graduation showcase, my classmates buzzed. This was it, the big chance. For me, it felt more like a verdict. The show would be in a larger city gallery with visiting curators from London, New York, and Berlin. One piece per student. No do-overs. I chose a large mixed media canvas I'd been building for months. Layers of trash textures, receipts, torn coffee sleeves, bus tickets, all spiraling around a single crumpled boarding pass in the center. It wasn't an exact copy of my real ticket, but it held its ghost. I titled it Exit Wound. A week before the show, I almost pulled it. I told Elise it was too personal, that nobody would understand, that maybe I should go with something prettier, easier. She raised an eyebrow. "In this city, pretty is cheap," she said. "Honest is rare. If you're going to take up wall space, make it matter." So I kept it. On the night of the showcase, I stood in a rented black dress and shoes that pinched, trying not to throw up. My classmates clustered with their parents, chattering in French or Italian, mothers and fathers pointing proudly at their names in the program. I stood alone with a plastic cup of sparkling water. During a break at the hospital, Taylor texted from Phoenix with a photo of the live stream on her phone. "I'm so proud of you," she wrote. "Your family has no idea what they threw away." When the doors opened, the gallery filled with voices and clinking glasses. People moved along the walls in waves, sometimes pausing, often drifting past without a second glance. At first it felt like no one even saw my piece. Then a man in his 30s stopped in front of Exit Wound and actually read the label with my name. He looked like he'd just gotten off a long flight, blazer slightly rumpled, eyes sharp but tired. He stepped closer, studying the painted ticket. "What's the story?" he asked, looking around until his gaze landed on me, hovering near the wall. For a second I wanted to lie and say it was just about travel or change. Instead, I told him the truth in a few stripped-down sentences. My family had thrown away my chance to leave. I dug it out, left anyway, and this piece was about the cost of walking away from people who didn't believe in you. He listened, then asked about my process, my other work, my plans. When he left, he handed me a card. Marco Alvarez, based in New York. Worked in tech, increasingly involved in the art world. He said my story and my work would resonate in Brooklyn, a place full of people trying to reinvent themselves. I assumed he was being polite. A few weeks later, he emailed asking if I'd be willing to send a couple pieces to a group show in a small Brooklyn space he was helping fund. Felt ridiculous. I was barely surviving Paris. New York might as well have been Mars. But I packed 2 canvases, filled out shipping forms, and watched the boxes disappear. Months went by. I kept working, serving coffee in the mornings and stretching canvas at night. Then one day, while I was wiping down tables at the gallery, Elise called me into her office and handed me her phone. The subject line of the email on the screen had my name, and the word "sold" in all caps. One of the Brooklyn pieces had a buyer. The buyer was Marco. In his message, he said he wasn't just interested in owning my work. He wanted to help give it a home. His idea was simple and terrifying. Open a small studio and gallery in Brooklyn focused on artists with stories like mine. People told they were foolish, unrealistic, a burden. He wanted me to be the first resident artist and co-curator. My name on the window. My instinct was to shrink, to hear my mother calling me a dreamer. A beggar. A girl who didn't understand real life. Then I thought about digging that ticket out of the trash. About that first envelope of cash from the tourist. About all the nights I spent alone, convincing myself that staying invisible was safer than being seen. I looked at Elise, waiting for her to tell me not to get my hopes up. New York won't be kind, she said instead. But it will be honest. And you, Olivia, are finally ready for that. A few months later, I stepped off a plane at JFK and dragged my suitcase into a city that smelled like exhaust and possibility. I didn't know that back in Arizona, the people who once called me a beggar were already starting to lose everything they'd sacrificed me for. While I was learning subway lines and stumbling through Brooklyn, my old life in Phoenix was collapsing without me. My empty seat at the kitchen table didn't make the rent smaller. The bills still came. But the girl who opened the cafe at dawn and laid cash on the counter was now pouring coffee in New York and keeping her paycheck. At first, Lisa tried to fill the hole with more hours and more credit cards. She came home later and later, kicked off her shoes, and stacked unopened envelopes by the sink like ignoring them might make them vanish. Jenna doubled down on influencer life. She filmed try-on hauls in the best patch of light, ordered clothes she couldn't pay for, and called every purchase an investment. When pink and red bills showed up, Lisa put them on cards and told herself it was temporary. Taylor told me later that if anyone asked about me, they just shrugged and said I was still overseas playing artist, like I was backpacking for fun instead of covering half their expenses. They didn't mention how much heavier the house felt without my second paycheck. The first real crack came when the furniture store cut my mom's hours, then cut them again. Less hours meant less money. Minimum payments grew claws. Late fees stacked. One night, in the middle of dinner, the lights went out. No storm. No warning. Just darkness and the fridge sighing to a stop. The next morning, my mom spent hours on the phone, begging for extensions from companies that have no idea who you are beyond your account number. A few months later, she lost the job completely. After that, everything sped up. They sold a TV, then some chairs, then jewelry. They held a yard sale. Jenna wore big sunglasses and acted like it was just decluttering, not survival. It wasn't enough. The notice to vacate came in a thick envelope taped to the front door. They moved to a cramped apartment across town, then to a cheaper one, then to a motel, then to a shelter that smelled like bleach and exhaustion. Somewhere between the second motel and the shelter, Jenna finally saw my name again. A mutual friend had shared an article about a new studio and gallery in Brooklyn, Carter Studio, founded by a Phoenix-born artist who turned family pain into mixed media work. The photo showed me standing under my own name on a white wall, beside Exit Wound. The caption mentioned a scholarship in Paris and a ticket thrown in the trash. Taylor told me the room went silent when they read it. Lisa sat down hard. Jenna stared at the screen like it might explode. Everything they had laughed at, everything they tried to crush, was there being celebrated by strangers. Beggar didn't sound like much of a punchline anymore. Shame couldn't feed them, though. After a few days of pretending the article didn't exist, they ran out of pretending and of money at the same time. With what cash they had left, they bought 2 bus tickets to New York. Days later, dragging worn suitcases and wearing the same clothes they'd slept in, they followed a cracked phone screens blew through Brooklyn until they stood outside a glass door that said Carter Studio. They took one deep breath they couldn't afford and pressed the doorbell. Inside, I was hanging a new piece when my phone buzzed with a security alert. I glanced down, tapped the notification, and watched the live feed load. 2 figures appeared on the screen, thinner, older, nowhere near the confident people laughing over a trash can in Phoenix. It took me a second to recognize them. Then I did. My mother and my little sister were on my front steps, and this time they were the ones hoping not to be shut out. I stared at the video long enough for the bell to ring again. I realized I was just standing in the middle of the studio holding my phone, mouth slightly open. Marco looked up from his laptop. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Someone at the door." Someone didn't cover it. My heart was thudding so hard it felt like it echoed in the gallery. I set my phone down, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked toward the entrance. Every step sounded too loud on the concrete. At the door I stopped. I had to remind myself. I wasn't the girl in that Phoenix kitchen anymore. This was my door. I decided who came through it. I opened it just a crack first, then swung it wider. Up close, my mom looked smaller. The Arizona sun had been traded for bus rides and sleepless nights, and it showed in the deep lines around her mouth. Jenna hugged her arms around herself. The glossy confidence I remembered had been stripped down to something raw and nervous. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then my mom tried a smile that never reached her eyes. "Olivia," she said softly, like she was checking whether she still had the right to use my name. "You look good. You really made it." I didn't move aside. I leaned against the frame, keeping the doorway between them and the gallery. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Hi, Jenna." The air felt tight. Jenna broke first. "So this is really yours," she said, peering past me at the clean walls and hung paintings. "Carter's studio. That's crazy." "Crazy is one word," I said. She let out a short, dry laugh. "We didn't exactly know how to," she started, then trailed off. My mom cut in. "We came a long way, Olivia. We just want to talk." For a moment I pictured what that trip must have been. The shelter, the bus ride, the first sight of my name in the window. A part of me wanted to fold instantly, to pull them inside, make coffee, and pretend we were just a normal family dropping by. But that reflex was the same one that worked double shifts and handed over cash while being called a beggar. I owed that version of myself better than to collapse this fast. "We can talk," I said. "Out here." My mom's smile faltered. "Out here," she repeated, like the sidewalk itself was an insult. "What, you too good for us now?" I shook my head. "No. But that door behind me." I glanced back at it. "That's my boundary. I didn't have one in Phoenix. I do now." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. "We're in trouble," she said quietly. "I know," I answered. "I saw the article. And Taylor told me some things." She flushed, shame cutting through the tiredness for the first time. "We lost the house. The job. Things got complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "That's one way to describe choosing credit cards over hard choices." She flinched. Jenna jumped in like she always did when silence got uncomfortable. "We get it, okay? We messed up. We said stuff we shouldn't have. But you left. You cut us off. You wouldn't answer calls." "There weren't any calls," I said. "Not the ones that mattered. No calls to say you were proud. Only calls when the rent was due." Jenna's mouth snapped shut. My mom stared at the sidewalk. "I know we were hard on you," she said at last. "I was scared. You wanted to chase some art fantasy in Paris while I was trying to keep everything afloat. I panicked. You literally threw my ticket to a different life in the trash," I said. "There isn't a gentle way to spin that." Her eyes filled. For a second, she looked like the woman who used to braid my hair and pack my lunches. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought if I broke your dream first, the world couldn't hurt you with it. I thought keeping you close was safer. Instead, I just drove you away. It didn't erase anything, but it was more ownership than I'd ever heard." Jenna shifted, swallowing hard. "I called you a beggar," she said. "A lot. The thing is," she looked down at her worn jacket, "now I know what begging actually feels like. It's not funny." I didn't rush to pat her shoulder or make it easier. The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was just honest. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Plainly. My mom took a breath. "We need help," she said. "Somewhere to stay for a bit. Maybe some money to get back on our feet. You're doing well. You can afford it." That old familiar expectation rolled in, a tide that always assumed anything I had was automatically theirs. I straightened, stepped fully outside, and let the door close behind me with a small, solid click. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I am doing better. Because I stopped treating myself like the family beggar. I'm not going back to that. I'm not bailing you out of choices you made." My mom's jaw tightened. "So you're just going to turn your back on us? After everything I did for you? You fed me and housed me when I was a kid, and I am grateful," I said. "You also used me. You threw away my ticket to a life where I wasn't stuck paying for your fear. Both things are true. I'm not rewriting them now because it's inconvenient." No one spoke. Jenna wiped her nose on her sleeve. "So that's it? You've got a fancy studio and we get nothing." I shook my head. "I didn't say that. I'm not going to rescue you. But I'm not going to stand here and watch you drown either." I told them about the program we'd started at the studio. The workshops for adults ground down by life who needed somewhere to put themselves back together. We partner with a local shelter, I said. Anyone who sticks with the program gets help with temporary housing and support while they rebuild. We've got more people needing it than we have spaces, but I can put your names on the list. You'd come in like everyone else. Cleaning, setting up, following the rules. No special treatment. No moving into my apartment. No credit card bailouts. Real work. Real change. My mom stared like I'd slapped her. You'd send us to a shelter? I'd connect you to a support system that doesn't depend on me sacrificing my life again. I said gently. That's the only way I can help you without going back to the person you expected me to be. Jenna opened her mouth to argue, then deflated. I'm tired of being proud and hungry, she muttered. Tired of pretending everything is content. My mom's gaze drifted up to the studio window, to my name printed cleanly on the glass. I never thought you'd be the one closing a door on me, she said. I never thought you'd be the one throwing something away. I swallowed the guilt that tried to rise and answered anyway. I'm not throwing you away, I said. I'm throwing away our old script, the one where I'm the beggar and you hold all the power. If you want something different, it's there. I nodded toward a flyer taped to the glass about our next workshop. But you'll have to earn it. Just like I did. For the first time since I'd opened the door. They were quiet in a way that wasn't full of anger, just shock. They were used to me apologizing, shrinking, smoothing everything over. This time I stood my ground on my own sidewalk and waited, knowing that whatever they chose next would say more about them than it ever again would about me. They didn't answer me right then. My mom kept staring at the flyer, reading the words healing and rebuilding like they were in a foreign language. Jenna shifted from foot to foot, eyes flicking between me and the studio. Finally she said she was tired of pretending she had it all together when she didn't even know where they'd sleep next week. My mom asked what exactly the program required, already bracing herself. Show up. Do the work. Tell the truth. Respect the rules, I said. Sounded simple. We all knew it wasn't. A few days later, after I talked to the shelter coordinator and our nonprofit partner, their names were on the list. They started coming twice a week. Not through the front door during gallery hours, but through the side entrance that led to the workshop space. The first day, my mom held a mop like it was a foreign object, cleaning up paint water she hadn't spilled. Jenna stacked chairs and wiped tables, listening as people around her talked about sleeping in cars, leaving violent homes, losing everything, without once calling anyone a beggar. In that room my family wasn't special. Just two more people who had fallen hard and were trying to figure out how to stand again. For me those weeks were surreal. I watched my mother pour coffee for strangers and listen without lecturing. I watched my sister pass brushes to a woman rebuilding after years of being told she was worthless. Sometimes they made small talk with me about bus schedules or supply deliveries. We didn't dissect the past every time we crossed paths. Healing didn't come wrapped in one dramatic conversation. Came in small, forgettable moments. Like the night I walked in and found Jenna staring at a blank canvas. Is it stupid to paint my own story when I don't even like the person I was in it? She asked. That's the point, I said. Art isn't about celebrating the version of you that hurt people. It's about making a record of the version that's trying not to anymore. She gave a short laugh and picked up a brush. My mom took longer. She showed up. She mopped. She sat in the back during group talks, arms folded but listening. One evening, a man shared how his parents had forced him into a career he hated, and mocked him whenever he mentioned what he loved. When he finished, my mom raised her hand slowly. She admitted she'd done something similar, only worse. She hadn't just mocked her daughter's dream. She tried to throw it away. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. Later she caught me alone. When I called you a dreamer and made you feel small, she said. I was really talking to myself. I was too scared to take risks when I was young, so I punished you for taking yours. I didn't tell her it was okay. I didn't say we were even. I just said I was glad she could say it out loud. Over the next few months things shifted piece by piece. Through the shelter my mom joined a job training program. Jenna got a part-time job at a thrift store. She hated it at first, then started to respect it when she saw how hard everyone worked just to keep the doors open. Eventually, They moved into a small shared apartment with other program participants. It wasn't the Phoenix house. But for the first time it was theirs in a way that old place never really had been. We weren't some magically healed, picture-perfect family. Holidays were awkward. My mom sometimes slipped back into old scripts. Jenna still made the occasional tone-deaf comment and had to catch herself. But there were also mornings when they came by the studio not to ask for help, but just to set up chairs for a workshop or sit quietly in the back as someone else spoke. Somewhere in that stretch of messy middle, my anger stopped feeling like armor and started feeling like a weight I didn't want to carry. I didn't forget what they'd done. I didn't soften our history in my mind. I just stopped letting the trash can moment be the only scene that defined us. I poured what remained of the hurt into new work. Pieces about boundaries and second chances. About doors that close and windows that open somewhere else. People walked into the gallery, read the little plaques and saw themselves in those layers. Some cried. Some laughed. Some signed up for the next workshop because they were tired of living inside a story someone else had written for them. Every new session I started with the same talk. You can't control the family you're born into or how they treat your dreams. I tell them. You can't control who throws away your ticket, literal or not. But you can decide whether you climb into the trash with it or climb out and keep walking. I remind them that setting boundaries isn't betrayal. It's survival. That forgiveness doesn't mean handing someone your life again, and asking them nicely not to smash it this time. Means taking your life back. Looking at the half circle of faces, people from everywhere, all holding their own shredded tickets and slammed doors. I see so many versions of who I used to be. A lot of them have been called lazy, dramatic, selfish. A lot of them have been called beggars in one way or another. I always end my story the same way. In the end, I tell them, my revenge wasn't seeing my mother and sister show up at my door with nothing. My revenge was building a life so solid their cruelty couldn't shake it, and then using that life to help other people stand up too. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped by your family, your boss, your town, hear this. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to grow with you. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who treats your dreams like garbage. And you are absolutely allowed to build something beautiful out of the scraps they tried to bury you under. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who'll come after you needing proof that it can be done.